All right, so it's me, I'm Mario. Okay, on our painting, we have finished out our underpainting, and if you haven't yet, you can do that. You need to do that before you start overpainting, and I do have that underpainting demonstration in Canvas for you. So like Hannah, I think you're one of ours that still needs to do your underpainting. So basically what we did for underpainting is our paint colors that we got yellow ochre, and we got raw umber. So there's two different kinds of browns in there. There's one that's like a darker brown, and there's one that's a reddish brown, and you want the darker brown, okay? And so then we would mix both of those together to kind of get our middle tone. So we used the brown as our darkest value. We used the yellow ochre as our lightest, and then a combo of the two to get our mediums today, okay? Okay, so today we're going to switch over to using our values between black and white. So we've had some value practice on this worksheet, so we should have a better kind of understanding on how to do these. So I just loaded up my palette with black and white paint. I can use the center of my palette to mix up my shades, or I can use a piece of palette paper, which I did have, and I set it down, and now I don't know where I set it down. So I'll be using my actual palette, and what I'm going to start off with first, I have my image here, and I can kind of move it over to the side so I can see that. So I'm going to look at where is my darkest value, and really, to be honest, in the sphere itself is where it gets the absolute darkest. My shadow is pretty dark, but it's not near as dark as my sphere here. And I'd kind of put a highlight on my sphere, but in reality and looking at my image, I actually have more of a lighter area on my shadow instead. So I'm going to start with my darker values first, and I'm going to go in with straight 10, and that's going to be like on my darkest side of my sphere, and then this upper right hand corner in my background. Okay, so I personally like to work from dark to light because it's easier. It's just kind of easier that way for me. You can go from light to dark. Now the problem with going from dark to light is sometimes you can't get your lights light enough. So you need to just kind of pick and choose. I like kind of setting my darks first, and then I kind of work through my mediums, and then I put my highlights in, okay? So like I said, I'm going to start with my straight 10, which means I'm going to go straight black, all right? So I'm using my larger round brush for this right now. And like I said, I'm going to go in to my straight black paint, and I'm going to start within my sphere, okay? So with that being said, I'm concentrating on using my brush in a semicircle fashion so I can still get the curvature of that sphere down. Okay? This is where underpaintings kind of help, and I'm going to bring up my water cup just a little bit closer here. And I'm going to move, here we go, and move that. So we might be able to see that just a touch better. Okay, so I moved my water cup kind of closer to me so I can add some water into my paint just to make the brushability of it just a touch easier. That's better, make it a lot smoother. Okay, so I'm just gonna work this black in, and so you guys can probably, you gals can see how the underpainting kind of helps already set your tone, and you're not going in with a straight black right on top of white canvas, okay? All right, as I move closer and closer to the center, I'm still using this black, but I'm kind of letting it run out. And with acrylic, you can always go over what you've already done. So I'll be putting in my values within there and just kind of overlapping as I go. So for right now, I'm just kind of getting that black in there. And then I'll be coming back to it later, okay? Also looking at where my shadows are, kind of underneath the bones. So kind of just still working that pure black right now. And then I'll come in and start adding more values here in a little bit, okay? All right, so now I'm gonna switch up to my top right-hand corner where I've got my darkest values up there also. And in my painting, I've got my background values pretty much blend into my sphere. So in my painting, it's gonna look that way also. So at this point, what I wanna do with this black is I'm going around the outside of my bone, and so I'm kind of letting this value start to also define out the shape in my bone as well. So I'm kind of working through repositioning some of those shapes and making sure that I'm really looking towards that observational painting here. Okay, so now I'm allowing my black to create the outline of my bone that I need. Okay, so this is how you're kind of gonna work your over painting, in that you are going to also let it start defining out the edges of your forms as well. Okay, so this is where you can go in and kind of make shape corrections. Like some of you, your spheres are a touch wonky in shape, and so now with your over painting, that's where you can come in and use it to correct out any errors that you made measurement wise and shape wise in your underpainting. Okay, so just like this, just getting that background in there. And I'll probably keep my background slightly textured, so I'm gonna work my paintbrush like that, and again, kind of letting it now define out the actual shape of my bone. Okay, so like when all's said and done, you won't be able to see any of the canvas. All right, so I'm also going to come up here and I can kind of start using this black as almost like an underpainting tool to just kind of work through the shape of that bone just a little bit better. Okay, I can kind of let some of my underpainting poke through for right now. And you guys can't really see where I'm working. So I'll come back down here. Okay, all right. Okay, so now what I want to do is I want to go ahead and concentrate in my sphere here, and I want to start kind of looking at differentiating my values in here. So I'm going to use my palette knife to mix up some pretty dark shades. So the deal with this is you've got to be able to create subtle value differences, because if you go from one value to another too quickly, like it's too big of a step, it's not going to look right. Okay, so just using my palette knife here, kind of hold it up to start mixing some grays. Okay, and palette knives really mix your paint a lot better than your brushes, so kind of get into the habit of that. Okay, so I kind of went ahead and mixed up an 8, and I can kind of start that as a base, and then off of one side, I'll add a little bit of black so I can kind of make them darker, and then on the other side, I'll have just a little white spot, and so then I can use that to mix each other in. So what I mean by that is I made up a base 8 here in the middle. I'm going to pull some white from here with my clean palette knife. I'm just going to set it off to the side so I can pull that in whenever I need it without contaminating, like I just kind of did. I'm going to clean my palette knife off. And then I'm going to grab some pure black and put it over here on the other side, and then I can work with that. Okay. All right, so I've got my brush nice and clean. I'm going to go ahead and just start with this straight 8, and I'm going to bring that into my highlighted parts here. Okay, so you're going to notice that it's going to be quite of a difference. Let's see if I can back off the glare here a little bit. Oh, come on. Okay, that was it. So if I can back off the glare just a little bit, it's going to be really tough for you all to see the differences I've got going on. Like, yeah. So here's the bummer part. I basically have a 10, and then right up next to it, I've got an 8 going on, but I know that's not what you can see on the screen, okay? So unfortunately, I'm just going to have to kind of work through it. So I've got a pretty blatant gray going on here. And I'm going to go ahead and kind of work that down into the black that I have already made. And then I'm going to dip my paintbrush right into the black, and then I'm going to start using some blending techniques to get one value to go into another one. Now you got to be careful and make sure that your paint is not too watery, or you're going to see the underpainting from underneath it. If that's the case, that's okay. You can kind of work through it right now, and then you can add more layers as you go. Okay, so I'm kind of going back and forth in between the gray that I've created and a black, and that's getting me my in-between values to kind of make it blend out. Okay, so just like that. Hard for you guys to see my actual values up on the screen, I understand. Just do the best that you can. Okay. In total, my sphere isn't really all that light. My brightest highlights are kind of the texture of that styrofoam. And so any type of detailing, highlighting that I have like that, I'm going to save that for the very last. Okay, so right now I'm just going to try and get the set values into my sphere. And it's okay if it kind of starts out underpainting like. Because then you can just refine as you go. Okay, something like that. Okay. So again, you're just working. You've got to get nice transitions between your values. So you kind of go back and forth. So it's good to have a few values mixed up so you can just work them back and forth. with each other. And you may kind of remix as you go. Okay. I'm kind of clean my brush here. All right, got that a bit too wet. So now my underpainting's pulling through. That's okay. I'm about to call it good for now on my sphere. Just kind of working through my blending stuff. And I know it's really easy to kind of get caught up in painting without looking at your image, but look back and forth in between it, because I'm looking at how well did you also work from observation. Okay. All right, something like that, just to start off for my sphere. I'm gonna have to come back. Okay, now I'm gonna go ahead and address the shadow that's on the other side of my sphere, and then I'm gonna probably do some tabletop highlighting. So I need to make sure I'm not going in with a straight 10, so it needs to be just a touch lighter than my sphere itself. And that should be good in here. And then, yeah. And then I'll pull a shadow highlight coming through also. All right, so I'm gonna butt this up right next to my sphere. Kind of really working that brush to its fullest extent. I'm gonna kind of refine out shadow that I had going on down here. I'll kind of work through my highlighting later. Okay. Got one little highlight that pulls through in here. So also you can use different pressures in your brush to go from thick to thin brush strokes. Okay. There we go. All right. Now I want to move into like a middle highlight. I want to get some of the tabletop around my sphere put in, and that'll kind of help smooth things out a little bit. So I need to target, if I'm looking at, I'm going to scooch my image over a little bit. So in here, I'm going to target that. I do have a shadow line that I can put in that will be, right about within here. I can set that in. So underneath that, I got that pretty watery. So underneath that, I need to target, probably like a 4 or a 5. So a good middle tone gray will work. So I'm kind of mixing that up on my palette. I want to make sure that I get enough to work with. And so I'll start kind of laying this in here. Really evaluate out your values. Okay, so like that first one that I just had mixed up, that was more like a 3 or a 4, and I need to push it more towards middle. So round of 5. That looks pretty good, what I got going on. Okay, so now I'm going to go ahead and lay this value down just to kind of start giving me some differences in my lights and my darks. So here we go. So have it kind of come along here. And again, the very beginning stages of your overpainting can look very similar to what your underpainting looks like. You're almost kind of sketching out again with your brush where these values are going to go. You're also going to see how you need to layer up with multiple layers of paint because you're going to see your underpainting coming through and you need to clean that up. Okay, so just working my brush in nice brush strokes and just working to cover up this area here. Probably want to keep this smooth. I'm going to keep my background a little more atmospheric by showing more visual brush strokes when I work in there more. Okay, so I'm needing to mix up just a little bit more here. I got to make sure that I match to the value that I had before. And guys, your paint will dry darker, so keep that in mind. So keep your values just a kind of touch lighter than you'd really want them to visually look because they will dry darker. Okay, got my sphere to be a little wonky there, so I might need to come back in and kind of fix it up. Okay, so again, just working this value through. So you're just basically applying the practice that you used with our brush stroke worksheets and your value worksheets. Okay. Okay. And just because I know that this back part here is my tabletop as well, I'm going to go ahead and start it with this base value, and then I can work my other values on top. So I'm just going to keep it the same value because it's also the tabletop. But for my shadow on the other side, that space, I'm going to go ahead and I'll use different values for that. So if it's pretty similar, just work it through and then work your values on top. But if it's a really large change, okay, you have a grace period to grab that and turn it off, please. Thank you. Okay. All right. So there I've gone with my base value in, and you can kind of see how that may have changed some areas. So if you got a little wonky on some places, you'll need to kind of fix that out. And then I can kind of work through just a little bit of blending out and kind of fading my shadow. Got my brush way too wet. Okay, so I'm just wanting to pick up a little bit of paint. I got too much on my brush. So it's within here, kind of around where my shadows started. And now this base table, I can kind of come in and blend out that shadow a bit. Just to kind of get a little bit more realistic with how shadows work. Oop, I'm going too far up into my shadow, which is okay. So I'm just going to kind of work at blending that out into that lighter gray. Going a little too far for right now, that's okay, because I can always come back in later, which is what I'm going to do. Fix this up just a touch. Now I'm just going to go ahead and clean my brush off totally. I'm going to kind of move this camera around so we can see it a little better. So at this point, you can use dry brush techniques where you've cleaned off, my brush is clean, and I've also gotten it pretty dry. And this is what your fan brush is also good for. But you can come in with just your dry brush like this, and you can mix one value into another while your paint is still wet. So I need to mix up some more value. Need to match what I put down. There we go. It's a little bit too light. Okay, so there's just kind of beginning stages of that there. Come in with a little bit darker value. And then I'm going to dry brush technique that again. Okay. All right. Do we kind of get it enough for today? Understand it out a little bit today? Okay. So I'm going to, personally on mine, I'm just going to stop here for today. And then I'll just give you guys kind of some time to practice it a little bit. And then I'll work through mine more as we go on. So I'm going to stop their video demonstration here.